Designed to help you fall asleep. On Snoozecast, we read excerpts from public domain works and, occasionally, original stories. Listen to us on snoozecast.com, like our Facebook page, and follow us on Spotify and Instagram. We'd like to thank our listeners. If you enjoy our show, please write us a review on the Apple Podcasts app or wherever you listen. Also, share it with a friend. This episode is supported by The Dance of Tree Branches in the Wind. Tonight, we'll be reading an excerpt focused on tree spirits from the 1890 book, The Golden Bough, A Study in Magic and Religion, written by Scottish anthropologist Sir James George Fraser. The book scandalized the public when first published because it compared Christian biblical stories to pagan rituals. Despite the controversy generated by the work, along with much critical reception amongst other scholars, The Golden Bough inspired much of the creative literature of the period. H.P. Lovecraft, James Joyce, Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, T.S. Eliot, and more were all influenced by this work. Let's get cozy. Close your eyes. Relax your body into the softness of your bed. Now, take a few deep breaths. In the religious history of European people, the worship of trees has played an important part. Nothing could be more natural. For at the dawn of history, Europe was covered with immense primeval forests, in which the scattered clearings must have appeared like islets in an ocean of green. Down to the 1st century before our era, the Hercynian forest stretched eastward from the Rhine for a distance at once vast and unknown. Germans, whom Caesar questioned, had traveled for 2 months through it without reaching the end. 4 centuries later, it was visited by the Emperor Julian, and the solitude, the gloom, the silence of the forest appeared to have made a deep impression on his sensitive nature. He declared that he knew nothing like it in the Roman Empire. In our own country, the wealds of Kent, Surrey, and Sussex are remnants of the great forest of Anderida, which once clothed the whole of the southeastern portion of the island. Westward it seems to have stretched till it joined another forest that extended from Hampshire to Devon. In the reign of Henry II, the citizens of London still hunted the wild bull and the boar in the woods of Hampstead. Even under the later Plantagenets, the royal forests were 68 in number. In the forest of Arden, it was said that down to modern times, a squirrel might leap from tree to tree for nearly the whole length of Warwickshire. The excavation of ancient pile villages in the valley of the Po has shown that long before the rise and probably the foundation of Rome, the north of Italy was covered with dense woods of elms, chestnuts, and especially of oaks. Archaeology is here confirmed by history, for classical writers contain many references to Italian forests which have now disappeared. As late as the 4th century before our era, Rome was divided from central Etruria by the dreaded Ciminian forest, which Livy compares to the woods of Germany. No merchant, if we may trust the Roman historian, had ever penetrated its pathless solitudes, and it was deemed a most daring feat when a Roman general, after sending 2 scouts to explore its intricacies, led his army into the forest and, making his way to a ridge of the wooded mountains, looked down on the rich Etrurian fields spread out below. In Greece, beautiful woods of pine, oak, and other trees still linger on the slopes of the high Arcadian mountains, still adorn with their verdure the deep gorge through which the Ladon hurries to join the sacred Alpheus, and were still, down to a few years ago, mirrored in the dark blue waters of the lonely lake of Phineus. But they are mere fragments of the forests which clothed great tracts in antiquity, and which at a more remote epoch may have spanned the Greek peninsula from sea to sea. From an examination of the Teutonic words for temple, Grimm has made it probable that amongst the Germans, the oldest sanctuaries were natural woods. However this may be, tree worship is well attested for all the great European families. Amongst the Celts, the oak worship of the Druids is familiar to everyone, and their old word for a sanctuary seems to be identical in origin and meeting with the Latin namus, a grove or woodland glade, which still survives in the name of Nemi. Sacred groves were common among the ancient Germans, and tree worship is hardly extinct amongst their descendants at the present day. How serious that worship was in former times may be gathered from the ferocious penalty appointed by the old German laws for such as dared to peel the bark of a standing tree. At Uppsala, the old religious capital of Sweden, there was a sacred grove in which every tree was regarded as divine. The heathen Slavs worshipped trees and groves. The Lithuanians were not converted to Christianity till towards the close of the 14th century, and amongst them, at the date of their conversion, the worship of trees was prominent. Some of them revered remarkable oaks, and others great shady trees, from which they received oracular responses. Some maintained holy groves about their villages or houses, where even to break a twig would have been a sin. They thought that he who cut a bough in such a grove either died suddenly or was crippled in one of his limbs. Proofs of the prevalence of tree worship in ancient Greece and Italy are abundant. In the sanctuary of Aesculapius and Cos, for example, it was forbidden to cut down the cypress trees under a penalty of 1,000 drachms. But nowhere, perhaps, in the ancient world was this antique form of religion better preserved than in the heart of the great metropolis itself. In the Forum, the busy center of Roman life, the sacred fig tree of Romulus was worshipped down to the days of the empire, and the withering of its trunk was enough to spread consternation through the city. Again, on the slope of the Palatine Hill grew a cornel tree, which was esteemed one of the most sacred objects in Rome. Whenever the tree appeared to a passer-by to be drooping, he set up a hue and cry which was echoed by the people in the street, and soon a crowd might be seen running helter-skelter from all sides with buckets of water, as if they were hastening to put out a fire. Among the tribes of the Finnish Ugrian stock in Europe, the heathen worship was performed for the most part in sacred groves, which were always enclosed with a fence. Such a grove often consisted merely of a glade or clearing with a few trees dotted about. The central point of the grove, at least among the tribes of the Volga, was the sacred tree, beside which everything else sank into insignificance. Before it, the worshippers assembled, and the priest offered his prayers at its roots, and its boughs sometimes served as a pulpit. No wood might be hewn, and no branch broken in the grove. The Ostyaks and Wogols, two people of the Finnish Ugrian stock in Siberia, had also sacred groves in which nothing might be touched, and where the skins of the sacrificed animals were suspended. But these groves were not enclosed with fences. Near Kuopio, in Finland, there was a famous grove of ancient moss-grown firs, where the people offered sacrifices and performed superstitious customs down to about 1650, when a sturdy veteran of the 30 Years' War dared to cut it down at the bidding of the pastor. Sacred groves now hardly exist in Finland, but sacred trees to which offerings are brought are still not very uncommon. On some firs, the skulls of bears are hung, apparently that the hunter may have good luck in the chase. The Ostyaks are said never to have passed a sacred tree without shooting an arrow at it as a mark of respect. In many places, they hung furs and skins on the holy trees in the forest. But having observed that these furs were often appropriated and carried off by unscrupulous travelers, they adopted the practice of hewing the trunks into great blocks, which they decked with their offerings and preserved in safe places. The custom marks a transition from the worship of trees to the worship of idols carved out of the sacred wood. Within their sacred groves, no grass or wood might be cut, no game hunted, no fish caught, not even a draught of water drunk. When they passed them in their canoes, they were careful not to touch the land with the oar, and if the journey through the hallowed ground was long, they laid in a store of water before entering on it, for they would rather suffer extreme thirst than slake it by drinking of the sacred stream. The Ostyaks also regarded as holy any tree on which an eagle had built its nest for several years, and they spared the bird as well as the tree. No greater injury could be done them than to shoot such an eagle or destroy its nest. Trees are regarded by the savage as animate, but it is necessary to examine in some detail the notions on which the worship of trees and plants is based. To the savage, the world in general is animate, and trees and plants are no exception to the rule. He thinks they have souls like his own, and he treats them accordingly. The sacred trees to which offerings are brought are still not very uncommon. They say, writes the ancient vegetarian Porphyry, that primitive men led an unhappy life, for their superstition did not stop at animals, but extended even to plants. For why should the slaughter of an ox or a sheep be a greater wrong than the felling of a fir or an oak, seeing that a soul is implanted in these trees also? Similarly, the Hidatsa Indians of North America believe that every natural object has its spirit, or to speak more properly, its shade. To these shades some consideration or respect is due, but not equally to all. For example, the shade of the cottonwood, the greatest tree in the valley of the upper Missouri, is supposed to possess an intelligence which, if properly approached, may help the Indians in certain undertakings. But the shades of shrubs and grasses are of little account. When the Missouri, swollen by a freshet in spring, carries away parts of its banks and sweeps some tall tree into its current, it is said that the spirit of the tree cries while the roots still cling to the land, and until the trunk falls with a splash into the stream. Formerly, the Indians considered it wrong to fell one of these giants, and when large logs were needed, they made use only of trees which had fallen of themselves. Till lately, some of the more credulous old men declared that many of the misfortunes of their people were caused by this disregard for the rights of the living cottonwood. The Iroquois believed that each species of tree, shrub, plant, and herb had its own spirit, and to these spirits it was their custom to return thanks. The Wanika of Eastern Africa fancy that every tree, and especially every coconut tree, has its spirit. The destruction of a coconut tree is regarded as equivalent to matricide, because that tree gives them life and nourishment, as a mother does her child. In the Yasawu Islands of Fiji, a man will never eat a coconut without first asking its leave. "May I eat you, my chief?" Among the Thompson Indians of British Columbia, young people addressed the following prayer to the sunflower root before they ate the first roots of the season. "I inform thee that I intend to eat thee. Mayest thou always help me to ascend, so that I may be able to reach the tops of mountains, and may I never be clumsy. I ask this from thee, sunflower root. Thou art the greatest of all in mystery." To omit this prayer would have made the eater of the root lazy and caused him to sleep long in the morning. We are not told, but may conjecture, that these Indians ascribed to the sunflower the sun's power of climbing above the mountain tops and rising betimes in the morning. Hence, whoever ate of the plant, with all the due formalities, would naturally acquire the same useful properties. It is not so easy to see why women had to observe continence in cooking and digging the root, and why, when they were cooking it, no man might come near the oven. Siamese monks, believing that there are souls everywhere, and that to destroy anything, whatever, is forcibly to dispossess a soul, will not break a branch of a tree, as they will not break the arm of an innocent person. These monks, of course, are Buddhists. According to Chinese belief, the spirits of plants are never shaped like plants, but have commonly the form either of human beings or of animals, for example, bulls and serpents. Occasionally, at the felling of a tree, the tree spirit has been seen to rush out in the shape of a blue bull. In China, to this day, the belief in tree spirits dangerous to man is obviously strong. In southern Fujian, it deters people from felling any large trees or chopping off heavy branches, for fear the indwelling spirit may become irritated and visit the aggressor or his neighbors with disease and calamity. Especially respected are the green banyan or jing, the biggest trees to be found in that part of China. In Amoy, some people even show a strong aversion from planting trees. The planters, as soon as the stems have become as thick as their necks, being sure to be throttled by the indwelling spirits. No explanation of this curious superstition was ever given us. It may account, to some extent, for the almost total neglect of forestry in that part of China, so that hardly any except spontaneous trees grow there. Sometimes it is only particular sorts of trees that are supposed to be tenanted by spirits. At Gerbalge in Dalmatia, it is said that among great beeches, oaks, and other trees, there are some that are endowed with shades or souls, and whoever fells one of them must die on the spot, or at least live an invalid for the rest of his days. If a woodman fears that a tree which he has felled is one of this sort, he must cut off the head of a hen with the same axe with which he cut down the tree. This will protect him from all harm, even if the tree be one of the animated kind. The silk cotton trees, which rear their enormous trunks to a stupendous height, far outtopping all the other trees in the forest, are regarded with reverence throughout West Africa, from the Senegal to the Niger, and are believed to be the abode of a god or spirit. Among the Uwe-speaking peoples on the coast, the indwelling god of this giant of the forest goes by the name of Huntin, trees in which he specially dwells, for it is not every cotton tree that he thus honors, are surrounded by a girdle of palm leaves, and sacrifices of fowls are fastened to the trunk or laid at the foot of the tree. A tree distinguished by a girdle of palm leaves may not be cut down or injured in any way. And even silk cotton trees, which are not supposed to be animated by Huntin, may not be felled. To omit the sacrifice is an offense which may be punished.